So we'll continue the exam review with Chapter 3. Chapter 3 was all about earning a wage and alternative forms of income, gross pay, net pay, yada, yada, yada. First question says Jonathan earns $18.50 an hour for regular hours of work. Jonathan works a 40-hour work week and is paid time and a half for overtime. Part A wants us to calculate his overtime rate of pay. So his OT rate is equal to his regular hourly wage, or his regular rate, $18.50 per hour. What do I have to multiply that by if he gets paid time and a half? 1.5. Excellent. What if it said he was paid double time? I'd double it. I'd multiply it by 2. 1850 times 1.5. Anyone know what that is? $27.75 per hour. On to part B. If he works a 45-hour work week, what is his gross pay? His gross pay is his total earnings. Okay? It's not what he takes home. It's not his net pay. Well, first of all, I have to do what to the 45 hours? I have to break it down into regular hours and overtime hours. What's considered regular hours? The first what? 40. If he works 45 in total, how many overtime hours does he work? 5. So I actually have to calculate 2 types of pay and then add them together to get his gross pay. I'm going to find his regular pay using his regular hours worked and his regular wage. And I'm going to find his overtime pay, which would be the number of overtime hours worked multiplied by his overtime rate, the answer I got in step A, or in part A. So let's do this. Let's figure out his regular pay. To get his regular pay, I'm going to take $18.50 per hour, and I'm going to multiply it by how many hours? 40. And what's $18.50 per hour times 40 hours? Well, the hours would cancel. $18.50 times 40, anyone? $740. To get his overtime pay, I need to figure out, or sorry, take his overtime rate. How much was that? $27.75 per hour. And what do I multiply that by? 5 hours. Once again, the hours will cancel. It will leave me with a dollar amount. $27.75 times 5 is $138.75. And then how do I figure out his gross pay? I'm going to add those two together. 740 plus 138.75. That's going to give me 878.75. $878.75 is his gross pay. So that would be what he earned before any deductions. Everyone okay with that? Make sure you get that copied down. This is all from chapter 3. Okay, I'll just come back to it. I'll get you on at the end of the video. Cool? So we'll start with the next example. Here's the next example. It talks about tips. says you worked a 4-hour shift as a server and your customer bills totaled $2,500 before tips. Your rate of pay is $10 an hour. How much did you make before tips during the 4 hours? How would you do that? How would you figure out how much money this person made before tips? 10 times 4. So you're going to go $10 an hour times 4 hours worked. We end up with $40. Yikes. It's not even legal these days. But thankfully, they get tips. How much do they receive in tips? We looked at part B. It says if all your customers tipped you 10%, how much do you make in total during your 4-hour shift? So I actually need to figure out what 10% of $2,500 is. So this is like your regular hourly wage. Now we got to figure out their tips. $10% of $2,500. 10% is a decimal. What is it? 0.1. So change it to a decimal by dividing by 100. You just swing the decimal spot point 2 spots to the left. Of means multiply. Anyone know what 10% of 2,500 is? $250. Well, that's pretty good. You're actually getting $250 in tips. What's your gross pay? Or your gross pay? What do I do with the tips and the regular hourly wage? Add them together. So the gross pay is just going to equal $40 plus $250. And they get $290 for that 4-hour shift. Not a bad deal. Thanks, tips. Everyone okay with that? The next question talks about deductions and CPP and federal and provincial taxes. And it wants to know, I don't think it goes the full way to figure out the net pay, but it's a partial or a part of those types of questions. All right, you need to calculate the Canada Pension Plan deduction for John, who is paid, I should say, like this, who's paid weekly with a contribution rate of 4.95% of any gross earnings above $3,500. That's the allowable exemption. If John's gross pay is $1,275 per week, calculate his CPP contributions. So to get the CPP contributions, 3-step process. We take the allowable exemption, $3,500. Do you remember what we divide it by? You're thinking of the personal loan calculator when you divide by 1,000. If they get paid weekly, what do we divide by? 52. If they got paid bi-weekly, what did we divide by? 26. If they got paid semi-monthly, 24. And if they got paid monthly, we divided by 12. What's 3,500 divided by 52? $67.31. Step 2. We take their gross earnings, that's this number, $1,275, and we subtract the 6731. The answer I got in step 1. That gives me $1,207.69. Step 3, I take the $1,207.69 and I multiply it by the CPP rate as a decimal. What's the CPP rate? It's an old rate. How do I change that to a decimal? Divide it by 100. What's it give me if I divide 4.95 divided by 100? 0.0495. And if I multiply that by 1207.69, I get $59.78. That is what they are going to take off or deduct from his gross pay for the CPP contribution. Everyone okay with that? Next part talks about his union dues and his pension, and it asks for the before tax deductions. What do I do with those two numbers? Anyone know what I do with the 35 and the 150? Do you remember? I'm just going to add them together. What are John's before tax deductions? $185. How do you get his taxable gross? To get the taxable gross, you're going to take his gross earnings and you're going to subtract his before tax deductions. So the taxable gross would be the gross. That's this number up here, $1,275 a week, $1,275 minus, anyone know what the before tax deductions are? That's the 185 right here. And what do I get for his taxable gross? $1,090. Now this number, the $1,090, is used to calculate John's federal and provincial tax contributions. So there's more money coming off his check, and it goes to the provincial government and the federal government. How do I figure that out? Well, I need to know these things. I need to know the taxable gross. That is $1,090. I need to know the claim code. We can see that right here. It's claim code 2. And I need to know the number of checks or the frequency of checks. How often John gets paid. What was that? It's weekly. So how many checks does he get? 52. And then I can go and find my federal and my provincial tax deductions from the tables. Now, if you're doing it on the exam, I'll put a section of the tables right next to your question, so you won't have to look it up online. Where did we look at, or where did I put them? I put them in your team. So if I open the team, I went into the federal and New Brunswick tax deduction tables. Which one should I open? 12 pays, 24 pays, 26 pays, or 52? 52. So I'm going to 52. And I'll zoom in for you. Okay. And just note that it starts with federal tax deductions. Now I want to look down this first column and find $1,090. Okay. And I want to look to claim code 2. So I got to go find 1090 here, and then I'm going to go claim code 0, claim code 1, claim code 2, and I just copy that number down. 1,090. I have to go scroll a little bit. Come on to this page right here. So $1,090 would be between $1,088 and $1,100. And then if I go claim code 0, 1, 2, what's the number for federal tax deductions? I'll zoom that in a little more so you can see it better. $117.25. So let's go back here, and I'll just write down 117.25. That's what they're going to take and give to the federal government off your gross income. To get the provincial, I'll go back into teams, and all I have to do here is once again scroll down. So eventually you'll notice this federal tax deduction heading will switch to NB tax deduction. So still federal, still federal. Here we go, New Brunswick provincial tax deductions. So once again, I'm looking for the taxable gross of 1090, and I'm looking for claim code 2. So just make sure that you use the taxable gross, the 1090, and not the actual gross, 1275, when doing the federal and provincial tax deductions. So 1090, getting close. It's between 1089 and 1101. Claim code 0, claim code 1, claim code 2. $90.95. So I go back to my file and I'll write down $90.95. And that's coming off your gross pay going to the provincial government. Everyone okay with that? Those are some examples of questions from Chapter 3. Tomorrow, we'll talk about simple interest, compound interest. We'll look at a credit card statement, and we'll tackle Chapter 4. On Friday, I probably won't see you, so we won't have time to make a little video for conversions and volume and surface area. I'll try and do that on my prep today. That's that.